Joan Hanbridge. I read some of her poetry, and I'm very pleased that I can also say that I learned a new word from Professor Stasiulis. Yold. So yold is the young old. So that's the age between 65 and 75. So I like that, yold. And then I also learned quite a bit of stuff that I didn't know about rabbits. From Simone Tandilo de Lange's rabbit, what do you call it? Menagerie or?
Yes, a rabbit menagerie.
Yeah, rabbit menagerie. But I was somewhat perturbed by the names Persephone, Hades, and Lucifer. I think these are very COVID-19 related feelings that come to the fore. So, it's so wonderful to meet in person. It's so nice to move out from behind the computer and to be among colleagues that I can personally congratulate you on this fantastic work that you did during this past year and a half. Very challenging, very complex time for all of us. But the research and the writing that was done by our staff and colleagues is truly commendable. It's wonderful. I want to congratulate you all on that. And it does not go unnoticed. Your efforts have certainly not gone unnoticed. The research that was done at Stellenbosch University in the past year will also feature in our annual publication, Research at Stellenbosch University, that's due to be published later this month. And what it shows is across all disciplines, science, economics, humanities, and what the researchers have been trying to do is to try and make sense of COVID-19 and trying to grapple with its challenges. And absolutely the same can be said for this great collection of COVID diaries that is being launched today during Women's Month. So in working through her own trauma, the American writer and academic Roxane Gay said, "I wrote myself towards a stronger version of myself." I wrote myself towards a stronger version of myself. And in these pieces that I looked at, I get a sense of that. And it is through doing that that we're able to get to sense making. And it's through this very difficult, some tortuous, and some may even call it torturous process that we're actually able to give structure to our thoughts and feelings. And I can see that is exactly what the contributors to this collection of essays have done. At a recent staff assembly, I showed 2 slides. The first was from the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. And it's very much also the response that we have and what I've also experienced to COVID and the cycle of elements of denial, of anger, depression, bargaining, and then acceptance. And I think a number of us, students, staff, support, academic and support staff, even in management, anger is something that one also has. It's a feeling that one has when one thinks about the pandemic. And sometimes it manifests itself in a weird way. Maybe naming our rabbits certain names, but also lashing out at people in an uncharacteristic way. And that we have to check ourselves again as to how we deal with what we're being faced with. But what I took from this is that the stories they tell of experiences of the strength, the vulnerability, the determination, but also the exhaustion of women in the strange times that we live. So, as I've been trying to say, is that in this past year and a half, we've all faced our own individual hardships and traumas. We've had to deal with it in our own ways, often in seclusion, very tight, without a tether to a physical community. And it's really something that we took for granted. Second semester started yesterday. The students are back on campus. We're in a new mode of ARCLA. I drove around town on Monday evening. They are back. They are back. But also at the staff assembly, I shared what is from the University of Michigan. It highlights steps we can take to promote self-care during this time. I got this from Dr. Margaret Orr, an executive coach that we had at the university. And she listed a number of these things: recognize and validate grief, practice mindfulness and focus on the moment, separate what you can and cannot control, connect with nature. Very importantly, take a break from the news. Doom scrolling through the news is not a good idea. Notice and manage your worried thoughts. Connect with others. Practice gratitude and pay attention to moments of joy. Find a balance between routine and flexibility, and take care of your body. Stay physically active. Number of things that the University of Michigan that they created as a resource, and that we can help to promote self-care. But some of these things sound a little bit glib, you know. A little glib. Yes, it's true, but this is tough. We're in a tough time. It's not a sprint. I said it's a marathon at the end of last year, but it's not even a marathon, it's a half marathon. Ultra marathon. It's making the comrades look like nothing. So, but what you've created here is powerful, and we can all benefit from that. They capture these feelings of anxiety and uncertainty, helplessness at times. But it also, what it does in the end, it helps us all feel less alone. We're in this together. So I really want to congratulate the contributors, the editors, and one of the hosts, distinguished professor of political science and the SARChI Chair in gender politics at Stellenbosch University, and Olivia.
Yes.
Olivia Ezeobi, a lecturer in the Department of Economics, for this wonderful work that you've done. And I also look forward to hearing Prof Soraya Seedat, distinguished professor in Psychiatry and SARChI Chair in Posttraumatic Stress Disorder, and is, I think, what we are experiencing to some degree, to giving your keynote to this. Really look forward to that. And thank you. Have a great evening. I look forward to chatting with you some more. One thing that I have learned, I'm so happy being able to come on and talk to people that I talk a lot. So just chase me away.
Thank you for those words and for the seriousness with which you looked at this book. We really appreciate it because, like you said, it's powerful and it makes a contribution in terms of understanding people's experience. I want to say that this book, and I want Olivia to come here. If it wasn't for Olivia, then this book would not have been here, because it was a spontaneous start, and it started with Olivia's indignation about basically men speaking on our behalf. And so this is how we started talking about the book. And I think at that point, we could not have imagined the book we have here today. We are very proud of it, and we're proud of everyone who has contributed and has taken it really seriously to write with such authenticity about an experience that we've never had before. Now, this is an experience of an entire planet being affected in ways that we could not foresee, and in ways that we have lost many friends, colleagues, loved ones. And I want you to think back about the 18 months, the past 18 months, what we had before these 18 months. Can you still remember? And this is the thing, that it's all very in the dim and distant past now. And I start my story by asking, what is normal? And is this the new normal? And we don't know. We've been in lockdown 4 just recently. Now we're in 3. Maybe we'll go back to 5. We don't know. So with this book, I think what we're trying to do is to give women space to speak in their own voices. And you've done it really well. You've done it so well that the second print run is nearly sold out. So there's big interest. And we think that, you know, this is it's not an academic book, but it is a book that captures experience, and it becomes an archive of what happened to us in this specific period that we have not foreseen, and that the world, we just didn't think that this was possible. So my story is titled Things We Lost in the Pandemic, and it's a play on Things We Lost in the Fire, the film, which is you lose your house and your material possessions, but you lose so much more. So it's a metaphor for the things we lose, the relationships, the social interaction, and all kinds of other things. So I think it's also made us aware of the very serious global inequalities. As academics, many of us are academics, we are aware of it, but you don't experience it in the way we've seen it now, this huge inequality gap. And the lack of care that we have for each other. So, you know, our carbon footprint is much too big, our appetite for endless consumption much too shameful, and our lack of care for others much too limited. And this is what zoonotic viruses are showing us. The golden thread that runs through the COVID diaries is that of care. Our care expands beyond normal limits, and it falls on the shoulders of women. Frontline care, care for families, care for children, homeschooling children, caring for others who are sick. And I'm not saying that men do not care. I know in many families in this time, men did their best, men did their part, but in the end, there is a disproportionate burden of care on the shoulders of women. And a feminist ethics of care includes responsiveness and responsibility. 2 dimensions that's really, of care that's really been challenged under, during the pandemic. And I think this is the thing about care, is that if you are serious about care, then not being able to be responsive or be responsible in that caring, because people start to think that care is elastic. It can expand indefinitely, and it cannot. So what the book also tells us is mental health issues. Women who have other health issues like cancer, what happens in those conditions in this pandemic. And let me end by saying this book is also a tribute to friendship. It's the friendships with women friends specifically that's carried us through this pandemic. I write about it in my chapter, so you can read it. And let's just get back to the theme of the bunnies, of the rabbits. Simone is our youngest contributor, but she's also my daughter. And Simone has had her own journey with depression, and she wrote this in a time that we were all suffering from, or many were suffering from depression under COVID. And Simone, I just want to say to you, thank you. I'm very proud of you. So just to continue with the rabbits, if you read the story, the rabbits are living, and the theme runs through her story and my story. The rabbits are living in the lobby. But I can now tell you that the bunny cage is nearly finished. Finishing touches are being put on the bunny cage, and I may have my lobby bags too. So, I now want to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Soraya Seedat. Let me just find what I need here. And I also want to welcome people who are watching the launch online. Thank you for the interest. And the book is available at major bookstores here in Stellenbosch. It's at Stellenbosch Books, but it's also for sale now in the lobby. Soraya is a colleague who also has a SARChI Chair, so she knows the heavy burden that we carry as SARChI Chairs in terms of the expectation of research. But she's a distinguished professor of psychiatry and executive head of the Department of Psychiatry at Stellenbosch University. She holds the South African Research Chair in Posttraumatic Stress Disorder, funded by the Department of Science and Technology of the National Research Foundation. She's been the recipient of several awards, including the World Federation of the Society of Biological Psychiatry Fellowship, the Lundbeck Institute Fellowship Award in Psychiatry, an MRC Mid-Career Award, Research Fellowship from the University of California, San Diego, the Anxiety Disorder Association of America Career Development Award, and the Humboldt Research Award in the memory of Neville Alexander. She has more than 20 years of clinical epidemiological and basic neuroscience research experience as a psychiatrist working in the field of traumatic stress and anxiety. And she's published over 400 peer-reviewed journal manuscripts and has co-edited 4 books. Soraya, when we thought about this launch, we couldn't think about somebody who would be more able to relate to what happened and people's stress during the pandemic. So please come and talk to us.
Good evening all. It's a real pleasure to be invited to this event, so thank you very much, Amanda and Olivia. It's all the more exciting in light of the times we live in and the challenges almost all of us face on a daily basis, both on the work and home fronts. Much has been said, written about, and studied regarding women's physical and mental health during this pandemic. The research that has been undertaken has been mainly observational in nature, but it's consistently highlighted the collective mental health burden that women have faced and continue to face since COVID was first reported in Wuhan, China in December 2019. This research that describes collective common health problems, health outcomes, and risk factors in the general population, but also in vulnerable risk groups such as frontline healthcare workers, provides a backdrop, a scaffolding of sorts, upon which more qualitative observations can be gleaned. And in this way, unique but overlapping narratives of women around the world can be juxtaposed and woven with large-scale quantitative observation. So individual stories best get to the core of the lived experiences of women during this pandemic. And this is why I'm especially intrigued by the book and the authors of the book that we're here to celebrate. I think it's fair to say that stories and experiences of women during the pandemic have been both painful and triumphant. It's also fair to say, based on emerging data, that women are bearing a much heavier psychosocial burden, cost of the pandemic than men. Gender is a well-known social determinant of health, including mental health. Women comprise the majority of the health workforce in South Africa and in many countries around the globe. But aside from the gender-based occupational risks that women healthcare workers have faced during the pandemic, women in the general population have been disproportionately faced with other stresses, which Amanda has alluded to, such as increasing caregiving responsibilities, domestic work, economic strain, social isolation, and exacerbation, as well as increased incidence of intimate partner violence and other forms of gender-based violence. We know that pregnant and postpartum women have been particularly at high risk for developing mental health problems during this pandemic. We also know that unpaid work that women have had no choice but to take on in their homes and in their communities during the pandemic has had a deleterious impact on their mental health. And so addressing this requires urgent policy change that recognizes, redistributes, and reduces the unpaid work that women have been burdened with for so long. Gender, therefore, has been an axis along which the COVID-19 pandemic has amplified disparities in healthcare, including access to health and utilization of health services. And this is even more concerning when we consider that pre-pandemic, women already had a much higher risk. They have much higher prevalence of mental health disorders, common mental health disorders, including depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder compared to men. So the disparate impact of stresses during the pandemic has only become more exaggerated between the genders on account of COVID-19. But it remains to be seen whether these long-term mental health effects will persist post-pandemic, and if they're likely to be influenced by gender. So this is what we've seen with previous pandemics, like Ebola and the previous SARS outbreak. Now, one notable gender difference that has emerged during this pandemic is that women are in fact at a decreased risk of severe disease, and I'm referring to SARS-CoV-2, so COVID, as well as death compared to men. And several cross-country studies show that among women there's in fact stricter adherence to public health policy measures, such as social distancing and avoidance of other health risk behaviors. And this may in fact, to some extent, be protective and may in part explain the lower rates of disease and death among women. Now, I want to take a side step because what has intrigued me as a mental health researcher, but I suppose just as a member of the public, is that leadership has in fact been central in this pandemic, and there's been much discussion and debate about whether sex differences in the highest echelons of leadership have actually mattered during the pandemic and whether they continue to matter. So it's been shown through a few studies that were conducted early in the pandemic that there is a relationship between the sex of political leaders and the way in which they have conducted themselves in terms of policy and practice initiatives. So you have to look at two prominent leaders, for example, Angela Merkel in Germany and Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who very ably steered their countries through the initial few weeks of the pandemic with less loss of life than many of their male counterparts. And research has shown that female leaders, on average, if you look across the globe, reacted more quickly and decisively than male leaders and implemented measures in their countries that resulted in low mortality rates from COVID-19. Now, we obviously have to take some of the other factors, aside from gender, that may be contributory. And some of these studies have factored them in, like population size and per capita GDP and population over the age of 65 and gender equality measures within the country. But they still show that countries that have been led by women and are led by women have implemented measures that have resulted in low rates of mortality. Now, what could be giving rise to these sex differences? And this is what is particularly intriguing because I've had an interest in gender differences in mental health and, post-traumatic stress disorder more specifically. Well, we know that there are widely documented stereotypes and perceptions about male-female leadership. And that's not just in the highest echelons of society. It plays out in our own environment, working here at a higher education institution. So there are both biological and psychological differences that could provide some explanatory power for cross-country differences in pandemic leadership and disease outcomes. We know that female-male attitudes to risk-taking differ. So women tend to have a greater propensity, and this was even pre-pandemic, to minimize risk. They're more risk-averse. Males are more likely to take risks. And for women leaders, there may actually be more salience in averting health-related risk and reducing loss of life. Whereas for male leaders, there may have been more salience in implementing short-term riskier decisions to minimize economic disruptions. Secondly, we have all experienced the the persistent source of high stress that this pandemic has brought with it. Now, there's good evidence from both animal and human research that there are psychophysiological and behavioral responses to stress between the genders. And so when women are faced with highly stressful situations, they're more likely to display cooperative and care-oriented behaviors, in contrast to men who are more likely to display competitive behaviors and fight-flight types of behavior. There's also some differentiation, and I've alluded to this, in terms of health behaviors between the sexes. As I indicated, there is good data showing that women are 1.5 times more likely than men to wear a mask, and also more likely to view COVID-19 as a serious health problem compared to men. We also know that women exhibit high levels of pathogen disgust, so they display high levels of emotions of disgust in relation to contamination and infection than men do. But we also know that personality differences between men and women can influence leadership behavior, because men are more likely to systematize and employ rule-based systems of leading, while women are more likely to employ collaborative strategies and to empathize with others. So all of these factors may play a role, and has just been a source of interest to me. Now, alongside these differences, words uttered by leadership throughout the pandemic have also mattered and continue to matter. We know that communication, rhetoric, the way in which messages have been framed, has been central to shaping public trust, adherence to health measures, as well as vaccination uptake. And if we consider speeches that have been made by heads of government throughout the pandemic, there are notable differences between male and female leaders. Both men and women leaders have emphasized the economic impact of the pandemic, but women heads of government have, compared to their male counterparts, actually focused more on individual and family level impacts of COVID-19. And they further highlighted the impact of the pandemic on vulnerable groups like the mentally ill, refugees, substance users, domestic violence, and family care responsibilities. Male leaders, in contrast, have tended to use more war rhetoric. Women leaders have been more empathetic and have made more personal appeals that have been centered on compassion and social cohesion. So I think these differences need to be taken into account. And I do think they need further scientific exploration, but they do, to some extent, speak to the resilience of women. And while I've been referring more specifically to leadership at a country level, I think that women have in so many spheres demonstrated resilience and leadership during the COVID-19 pandemic that has actually been hugely admirable. And we only have to circle back to the reason that we're here this evening, to celebrate a book that harnesses the diverse voices of women to give a collective voice to women during COVID times. So I'd like to end off with a statement that Melinda Gates, arguably the better half of the Gates family, made some time back. She said, "A woman with a voice is by definition a strong woman." Thank you very much.
First, we want to thank you for being here. I'm one of your biggest fans. I follow your reading, your articles in popular media. And an article you wrote in April last year, at the very start of the pandemic, one of the things you mentioned there was that whatever people think the mental health impact is going to be, it's being grossly underestimated. It's going to be so much worse. And I quoted you to so many people, and I took some license and I changed your words a bit, and I said, this head of psychiatry said there's a tsunami of mental health problems coming, and you were accurate, you knew this. So it's very exciting for us to have you here, and we just give you a small token of our appreciation.
So now I would like to ask Olivia to also speak about the book and about her chapter, and then we've asked 5 authors and one poet to read from their chapters. And I'm going to read the order now. If you forget where you are in this order, I will help you out, but it will, I don't want to get up here again and read it. So the first would be Gazal, then Simangele Mashasi, Joan Hambidge, Tasnema Cornelissen Nordin, Lumari Clear, and Loretta Williams.
Once again, good evening. Thank you for being here. Before I start, I just want to read the dedication of my book because it is important. It's a big part of who I am and why I'm here. So if I can, sorry about this. This book is dedicated to my late father, Levi Engelbrecht. So I do miss him a lot at the moment. Who taught me to believe in myself, and my mother, Minnie Engelbrecht, who is here at the back. Mom, if you can just wave. And my mother, Minnie Engelbrecht, who taught me how to love. So I'm very thankful for that. I'm going to read a bit about some things that I wrote, and then I'm going to get back to the preface and just say a few things. So this is from my chapter, Room of My Own, that was inspired by Virginia Woolf's essay on A Room of Her Own. There were days I sat in my car to grade essays because I could not do it in my home. And the reason, for those of you who don't know my background, I have a 3-year-old son. He was 2 years old at the time, and he would not let me work while he was awake. So I could only work when he was asleep. If I tried to mark, he wanted to draw. If I was on the computer, he wanted to type. So that's why I graded essays in my car. The university where I worked was closed, and staff had no access to their offices. I literally had nowhere to work aside from in my car. Keep in mind that it was winter, so I could not work outside in the grass. It was raining. This was what started me thinking of Woolf's essay about a woman needing a room of her own. In her essay, she was referring to women needing a room of their own to write fiction, but I believe it extends to academic writing as well. I believe it extends to all work that requires focus and higher level analysis. And at this point, when talking about a room of our own, I just want us to think about students in primary schools, high schools, students at universities who do not have a room of their own at home. And so students live in overcrowded conditions, and you can see there's something close to my heart. Just for us to take a moment and reflect that they're not able to do the same amount of work during lockdown when they don't have a room of their own. So that was part of where that came from. On a happier note, let me read what I wrote on 20 July 2020. Today was my first day back in my office since March. What joy to have a room of my own again where I could write. A room where I could be productive again, get work done, tick items off the to-do list. I was happy, but also a bit paranoid regarding the traces of the virus. And like our esteemed psychiatrist professor said, women are a bit more germ-phobic than men, so I was very afraid. I refused to use the bathroom at work. This was because one of my cousins said, what if people were not using the mask in the bathroom and there were viruses floating around? So I refused to use the bathroom at work, which meant I had to leave the office after 5 hours of working. I would have preferred to stay at the office for 8 hours. On a more serious note, Virginia Woolf wrote that a woman needs money and a room of her own to write fiction. Although I'm not wealthy, I have a stable income, for which I am very thankful. As an economist, I am more aware than most about the levels of poverty and inequality in our otherwise beautiful country. The inequality in South Africa is an ugly thing. Ugly is actually too mild a word. A word still needs to be invented to describe the ugly, devastating, unacceptable nature of inequality in South Africa. South Africa has the highest income inequality in the world. This has worsened during the lockdown. More than 3 million people have lost their jobs and hundreds of thousands have gone hungry. I was one of many economists who asked the government to end the hard lockdown sooner. My concern was for the livelihoods and health of many South Africans. For many, the risk of dying from hunger felt higher than the risk of dying from COVID-19. As an economist, I had arguments with other economists who I saw as living in ivory towers who did not have empathy for the poor. And yet I just want to talk about the tension I felt on the one hand as an economist, but not knowing what the restrictions are and the constraints, but on the other hand also as a human being seeing all the suffering. And I write, am I being judgmental when I feel that some economists see and write about poor people as statistics, forgetting that they are human beings? Am I a bad economist for thinking government should spend more on social welfare despite growing levels of government debt? This has not been a normal year, so the old normal rules cannot apply. I do not have the answers. As an economist, I'm well aware that there are trade-offs and that there are limits to what government can do, especially in a country like South Africa that has a relatively small tax base. However, the humanity in me overrides the economist in me when I say that people matter. We cannot have people going hungry if there's any way that we can change this. The part of me that is the mother overrides the economist in me and cries out that we must do something to ensure that all children have access to enough food to survive and to thrive. That was from my section, and I actually want to end what I'm saying with something from the preface. And I'm actually quoting from a poet. And after that, I'll give us a chance to read from her section. But just to give you also kind of a picture of why we also did this. The poet Audre Lorde wrote, and when we speak, we are afraid. We are afraid our words will not be heard, nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid, so it is better to speak. We have chosen to speak. We tell these stories as an act of resistance, as an act of affirmation, and as an act of survival. Gazal, over to you.
Oh, I'm nervous, haven't done this in a while. Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. In my essay, I do reflect on the extreme privilege from which this essay is written, but that part is not going to feature in my reading, so I am aware of it and I do address it at a later point in the essay. I'm reading from the beginning, so the second half is the more serious philosophical part. I thought this was more fun, but let's see. Okay. Everything is cake. Reflections on mortality and a new world order. The week before lockdown was announced in South Africa, the last week of March, I was at the big yearly arts festival in Stellenbosch. It was late autumn. The weather was characteristically beautiful. Fresh mornings and chilly nights with bright sunny skies that we spent bright sunny days that we spent lazing under the trees outside the festival tents, drinking coffee or beer, while critiquing late capitalism or talking about art, usually at the same time as one does these days. Everyone was hugging rebelliously, scoffing at the news of the virus from Wuhan, performing our leftist disregard for alarmist narratives about global contagion, our South African brand of indifference to rules, and or our Afrikaner faith in our own good health, also middle-class arrogance. I was surprised when an older, respected feminist journalist, a friend of a friend, kept insisting that our world views would be tested, that everything would change. Because of the virus, she said. We nodded politely. On the 3rd of April 2020, which is still the beginning of COVID in South Africa, but not in Europe or India, Arundhati Roy publishes an article in the Financial Times in which she argues that the virus has created a rupture in our reality. A rupture that, and I quote, offers us a chance to rethink the doomsday machine we have built for ourselves. That it is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. In the first strange weeks of lockdown, I am echoing her in the endless conversations I have in text messages and video calls. So is everyone I speak to. Something's got to give, we say. The center cannot hold. As we send around pictures of wild animals strolling on deserted public roads and the water in the canals of Venice that is for the first time in decades crystal clear and filled with fish. But as the weeks progressed, somehow, sometimes, some of us managed to turn our fractured attention to the doomsday machine we have built for ourselves, just to find, to our great surprise, that its walls are closing in on us in new and more menacing ways. Intensified regimes of corporate and state surveillance, stifled activism, the flourishing of big businesses to the detriment of small ones. It was said then that Checkers is opening spaza shops in South African townships. At an interpersonal level, we are choosing an old world rather than a new one. We fall back into the gender roles that we thought we had moved on from. In heterosexual relationships, it is the mothers who do the homeschooling and the childcare. The fathers have the high-paying jobs that must be done uninterruptedly in loud Zoom meetings that reverberate in all the rooms of the house through the closed doors of the study. Successful working parents now cannot rely on the care and domestic labor of Black women. We are reminded once again that raising a child is a full-time job for someone. Domestic violence peaks. We are isolated and disconnected from our communities. Most of us who can choose to embrace an existence of Netflix and mindfulness meditation, sourdough baking and crafting, online shopping and workout videos from American celebrity trainers on apps that belong to Facebook. Our social media usage increases by something like 100%, I learn on Twitter. How is this a portal to something new? I get tired of myself and these happy complaints as I write them down. Now I skip a big part. In the middle of July, after months of lockdown and several global cycles of collective online outrage and despair, my social media timelines start filling up with cake. Video after video of big knives cutting into ordinary objects like a Crocs shoe, a pack of Doritos, a roll of toilet paper, a plate of salad, an arm, a leg, just to reveal that it is made of cake. The meme started with a picture posted by a famous bakery famous for baking cakes that look exactly like ordinary objects. Everything is cake, the internet exclaims. Cutting into my wife, someone tweets, it turns out that she is in fact made of cake. And inevitably then, am I cake? Have I been cake all this time? Nothing is what it seems, a reality untethered from itself. Bright colors and sugar and an endless stream of repetitive online content are the only things we can count on. As lockdown drags on, I withdraw deeper into myself, doing yin yoga classes of an app made in California. I spend a lot of time thinking about the new world order, breathing deeply to rest in my bliss body and wishing love and happiness upon all living creatures in that way that is so calming and so utterly, utterly useless. I try not to get anxious about my friends falling pregnant one by one. Through Donald Trump and climate change, a global pandemic and mass hunger, the intensification of order regimes, the deepening of systems of state surveillance, women my age are having babies and finding seemingly exquisite, unambiguous joy in adding more people to this mess. Everything is not cake. I read the philosophical arguments against procreation in a time of climate devastation, and like so many others, I feel intense disdain for these thinkers who reduce the profound existential matter of new life and kinship to simple calculations about carbon emissions and life chances. At the same time, I experience a wave of incredulity with every baby bump that announces itself on Instagram. Are we not reading the same news? Why are you not scared? But, and I'll end with this paragraph, I come to a fuller understanding of the fact that there's something wrong with my way of thinking about having babies when I look at Jacinda Ardern in her pajamas addressing her nation after putting her toddler in leave to bed. A radical reinsertion of the maternal body into the realm of the political, still today the territory of old white men. And then I turn to Hannah Arendt and her concept of natality, but that you will have to read in the book.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. Gosh, normally these things are so much taller than me. This is a very pleasant surprise.
It's woman who put it there.
And happy Women's Day, right? Can we get an applause for that? I mean, really. Okay, I only have 5 minutes. My name is Smangele Mashazi, and I'm really excited that I got to be part of this project. And I remember when we wrote this, and it was like 3,000 words, I already felt like, shoot, this is not enough. And now they tell you pick something and say it from the thing, and I'm thinking, shoot, this is not enough. So please read the book, and I'll try and highlight the things. One of the things I thought of was when I listened to Prof speaking was the fact that a lot of this came from people being upset that our stories were being told by men. And then we would get calls to participate and speak about our experiences as women in academia, as women who work, blah blah blah. I love participating, and I would go on every link, and I would realize that the woman they're talking about is not me, and it worked on my nerves very badly. And so when the call for this book came, I didn't actually read it properly, but I thought it was the same old, and so I proceeded to send an email to the editors saying how I've just reached, I'm up to here with people asking for women to talk, but they're not asking for me. And they very calmly told me if I just read, I'll see that this was for all of us. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first page where I say, and I'm reading this off my cell phone, excuse. Each time I hear calls for the accounts of women during this time, it seems like the questions are more or less, please, tell us how you're struggling. Tell us how much harder it is for you than the men you're married to. How do you manage to be a working mom or caregiver? Tell us how you cope with single mother responsibilities, etc. There's an assumption that at a certain age, this is what all our lives look like. It feels a little like the rest of us have no challenges or experiences to share from this crazy year. I'm writing this because the voices of all women were invited to say something. I wanted to be known that there was also me and plenty like me in the category of women or working women in 2020. I would therefore like to offer an account that looks and sounds like me. By the way, mine is called There Was Also Me. I am the single woman alone in her flat since the president closed the country. This position offered me a great amount of peace, perhaps even an overdose thereof. Often happy as Larry, anxious at times, struggling to focus, but counting my blessings because I can live my quasi-housewife dreams and support myself. I wasn't drowning in the sense of juggling work and the second shift. And then I want to skip, and I wasn't going to read this, but then the lady before me reminded me that we had an experience in common. At some point, I was enjoying being at home, being alone, but I also like people and I also like hugs. And I remember saying, so in the beginning, sorry, let's just see. Where did I want to start from? Excuse, I'm not the most organized of humans. Yes, okay, so I mean, at some point people were baking banana bread and such. And then I realized it's really nice, but we still have jobs, right? And this was not a get out of jail free card. And so I still had a job, thank goodness. And a number of things happened, and eventually you also realized, shoo, now comes the emotions. So I said, then of course came the emotions. As much as I like being alone, this level of alone was neither normal nor healthy. I missed people. I hadn't hugged anyone since the 14th of March. I remember this because I remember the event I performed at that night and how we all acted like COVID-19 was a big joke. We hugged and shared drinks in defiance with the nagging awareness that this was probably our last show for a while. And then lastly, I'm going to skip to the end. Right. I think where I want to, right, there we go. An inherited fear. I mean, I live alone, so, and I also am a bit of a hermit. So what I did, because I kind of thought that it would end soon, right? So what I did is I just closed the door. Uber Eats, Checker 60. I went nowhere. You know, I was terrified as well because I have an underlying condition, so I was really, really scared. And then, of course, it didn't end, right? So there was a time where I heard bad news from home and I ended up lying against my bed because I really just needed a hug. So I sat on the floor and I write about it in here and I leaned against the base of my bed. And I thought I could call a friend now, but I'm kind of scared of having someone over. So so now I have lost where I was supposed to be. Right, Right, I think I've got it. An inherited fear also became a new companion. In adhering to the rules, I had now become too scared to go outside. I think I'd convinced myself that this whole thing had an expiry date, and the hermit that I am, I had the power to stare it down. As I reflect, though, I have a great amount of gratitude. I could still work, and mostly from home. The fact that public events were cancelled didn't mean that I'd be out on the streets. I had a comfortable and safe place to call home during this time. I'm so grateful for the level 5 stillness that allowed me to hear the birds and be more aware of the multiple displays that the sky spoiled me with. The corona coaster hit me as hard as it hit anyone else. Some days I was crying because this all overwhelmed me and scared me. Other days, I was doubting my decisions and whether all this caution was necessary. Being alone, I also spent a lot of time in my own head, and it's loud in there. Sometimes I'd think myself into a corner of anxiety. On this point, I am grateful for friendships, really I am. People who stayed in contact and broke the solitude so that I had company to keep me sane. I'm grateful that though I was not home, my family is part of a supportive community who help each other. I'm grateful for the time I had to do some personal work, but we all know that this is a lifelong project. I had many things I'd hoped to do before lockdown and new goals I'd made for during lockdown. I won some, I lost some, and I choose to be kind and forgive myself. Although this period has not been a picnic for me, I acknowledge that it could have been so much worse. People have been through different levels of hell and loss, and it almost feels wrong to say, I am okay. However, my voice would like to say that I had my struggles, but I did not drown. They may not resemble yours, or they may not resemble others, but they were valid. Among the voices presented here, I'd like to add one, mine.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear my word? Okay. Well, Mr. Vice Chancellor, Rector, nice to see you again. Amanda, Olivia, thank you very much for asking me to write a contribution. And I must say that I started reading this book about a week ago, and I was completely gobsmacked by the dense articles, essays, the different voices, the different implications, from Lou Marie Creer to Stella's contribution, to Amanda's contribution, Azil. And I just thought, how fabulous. Ek het my slag verloor as 'n leerprediker, like it my. How wonderful to have all these contributions here today. And I think this is a book that should be prescribed. It's more than about COVID. It's also about anxiety, anxiousness. Now, when Amanda asked me to make a contribution, my essay is entitled Love in the Time of Corona, which of course is a reference to Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I traveled through Colombia, actually going to all these houses. So I thought Love in the Time of Cholera would be a very interesting and ironic intertext here. I think we all know what anxiousness entails, angst, angoisse. And in my volume of poetry, Lotse Vrou, Lot's Wife, I have addressed anxiety. Anxiety, a kind of Gazal. Zizek means pain comes wordlessly. The only true emotion is anxiety. Everything is learned, love and jealousy and desire, the whole caboodle. Zizek means pain comes wordlessly. The only true emotion is anxiety. In a dream, you stretch out over my back as vivid, compelling as an obituary. Zizek means pain comes wordlessly. The only true emotion is anxiety. An envisaged Gazal about our affair, a Persian trip first planned but then just tabled. I think traveling has been tabled for me for quite a while, and I'm also going to read a poem from my latest volume of poetry, Liefde in die tyd van Corona, which we translated then as Love in the Time of Corona. Now, maybe I should just say something about the Gazal. It's a Persian form of poetry. It consists of 5 to 15 couplets with a refrain. It works with rhymes or partial rhymes, so that is why I have to make these references. And of course, I love the Persian world very much, which I will hopefully see very soon. From my latest volume of poetry, entitled Nomadiese Sterre, Liefde in die tyd van Corona. Wat sal spreke Damaske vir beide liefhebbendes? Geen aanraking of soenie. Selfs in verskillende tydzones, vreemde vaste lande, mes 'n kinderlegkaart, verkeerd of onderste bo afgedruk. Jou plek en myne terselfdertyd. Net 'n gedeelde skerm, min of meer. I translated it as follows with the help of Amanda, and we thought this could be okay. Obviously a mask for both lovers, no touching or kissing even in different zones on foreign continents like a child's puzzle, backwards or upside down. Your place and mine simultaneously with a shared screen, more or less. Now I think what I've learned during the last year and a half is that although this was a very challenging time, we have been through this before. There is something like the Second World War, for instance, when poets like T.S. Eliot wrote their most definitive works. Yes, I think if we think about the state of emergency in this country during the 80s, I wrote a poem in my volume of poetry called Donker Labyrinth. The following poem was translated then by Joe Nell. In terms of the fear of further Involvement Act, the Minister of Emotions imposed this very morning a state of emergency on you, my beloved, besieged city. With emergency regulations and curfews, I may no longer love you at sunset. A draft paper, no further meaningful communication. Writers' passionate meetings between us are prohibited. Breakfasts together, telephone calls, meander in the labyrinth of 3 minutes. But I, the eternal revolutionary, distribute leaflets in the dark, inciting a coup d'etat. I combat these infuriating laws, wave banners furiously in the town square, incite passers-by, unaware of the effect this has on me, and hopefully on you. Now I will go underground in devastating anguish, but I, the eternal revolutionary, will fight on against man-made laws and proclamations which you, my besieged one, so recklessly silent, so silently reckless, accept and endure. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to attempt to take my mask off without destroying my scarf. The greatest challenge of lockdown and wearing a scarf and a mask and glasses has been challenging. Thank you so much for inviting me to write and to lead part of my essay. Caused great stir of emotions every time I read it in my home and the girls say to me, "Mama, we like your writing," and Iman says to me, "But Mama, I'm not 7 anymore." So my essay is titled COVID-19, Working a 25-hour Shift. It's been 6 months of lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. 6 months of working non-stop, making sure that everyone is okay, that daily chores are done, that there's food at every mealtime, that every task that needs to be done gets done, but alas, it would seem that nothing really gets done. Every day of lockdown has become more and more difficult. At the same time, though, 6 months has passed by very quickly. Most of what I had set out to do, because I would be at home with my husband and children, just never got done. Yet, I've been working a 25-hour shift. I keep asking myself, how is this possible? My husband is a hands-on and loving father who does everything in our home. We share all tasks. Where one can't, the other would step in. My most spoken words have become, I'm tired. I'm almost embarrassed about it because I'm at home. How can I still be tired? Working from home should be a dream come true. No rush, no sitting in endless traffic, but no, it has become intensely stressful. During the early days, while I was hearing others complain about finding it stressful, I was at peace, enjoying being with my children and my husband 24/7, with no desire to go out. Not even the household chores bothered me. It was just part of a day's job. As a social worker, I've rendered services to so many children who've been neglected by their parents, and now I'm neglecting my own. The guilt I feel is overwhelming. I am tired. I am tired of reflecting and figuring out how to keep all the balls I juggle in the air. I am tired of being in a constant fight with my 7-year-old because she's loud and demands my attention. The work and home life balance has been turned more than just upside down. It has become a mess. It is harder to try and get balance. The harder, the longer it becomes. And in the process, my family and I suffer. My children and my husband feel neglected, and I feel guilty. Still, I work a 25-hour shift, and I produce nothing that will translate into academic recognition. Yet, I've given it my very best, ironically, in order to give my children the best. I know there's a lesson in there somewhere, one my parents taught me, but is it worth the sacrifice? I'm left wondering. Then I meet friends, family, and acquaintances whom I've not seen or spoken to, and hear heart-wrenching stories of loved ones being lost, how income has been lost, how children have not been able to go to school and have had no access to an online platform to continue their schooling for various reasons. I am grateful. I'm grateful to have a job, grateful to still have earned my full salary while friends and family and neighbors have lost jobs. I'm grateful that not once during this lockdown period or at any other time have my children gone hungry. Our cupboards are filled with food and much more. Snack boxes, my 3-year-old calls them, can be filled at the click of a button as I shop essentials online and get them delivered to my door. I feel guilty, and as I'm not on the front line as a social worker, serving food to those who are hungry, as food poverty is a reality. For now, the phrase charity begins at home takes on new meaning, as my responsibility is to keep my children safe and not potentially expose them to the virus, as both our girls have comorbidities, having been born with polycystic kidney disease. To ease the guilt, we donate to a local soup kitchen. There's just so much inequality in this beautiful country of ours. The disparities between the haves and the have-nots have become so much more apparent. I feel guilty for having been privileged to a good education, to be employed in an organization which is a world-class institution and works hard to maintain high standards. But I also feel relieved that my children are sorted. But in order for me to sustain this, my 25-hour shift continues. Every so often, someone would wake up in the middle of the night while I'm working. Mama, I want you. And off I go, knowing full well that even if their dada tries to help out, you'll get chased away. Shame, the guilt and rejection you must feel, I find myself thinking. For me, gender equality in my home and in my life means recognition that as men and women, our roles are different, that we do things differently. So, somehow the world is more forgiving of men than it is of women. I feel as a woman, I have to work harder to attain the same recognition male counterparts get without the guilt and the sacrifices women make. Lockdown has been unforgiving, yet in it all, there's a lesson for everyone. As restrictions have eased, so humanity has returned to old habits of being intolerant as crime rates have seemingly surged and violence by men against women and children continue. As I reflect on this, I cannot help but be overwhelmed by guilt, frustration, anger, and gratitude. This lockdown isn't over. Neither is my 25-hour shift as I hear the call to report for mother duty. Mama, I want you.
Hi, I'm Marie Kruger, and thank you, Amanda and Olivia, for including me in this wonderfully moving project. I think it was moving while we were doing it and moving events, so thank you very much. As a psychologist, I have to say, I'm working with human pain all the time. I have to say that for me, what was most striking about COVID was that there was nothing new under the sun, that everything was really a continuation of what I knew before. But it was as if everything was crudely and terribly amplified. Loneliness, anxiety, depression, anger. So I saw what I used to see, but just in much more intense forms and much more destructive forms, I think. So my essay is called Of Love and Violence, Snow White and the Seven Mirrors. I 5 minutes, so I'm just going to read the beginning and the end of the essay. So I hope it makes sense doing this. So the essay starts with a few citations of feminist authors. I'm going to read one by Ronaldo Comfort from a poem of his. She was my mom, and she taught me how not to love myself. Sy was my ma en sy het my geleer hoe om nie lief te wees vir myself. So, having start, my mother died this afternoon. Do you have an opening for me sometime, as early as possible? I get this message on Sunday night, 3 May 2020, 7 minutes to 8 in the evening, 40 days into COVID lockdown, and a week before Mother's Day. The message is from my patient Rose. Rose is a 56-year-old medical doctor whom I've been seeing for 7 years in psychotherapy. The body of Bella, Rose's mother, was found in the shower of her apartment in a southern suburbs retirement village on that afternoon. Bella slit her wrists with a carpet knife. She was found in the shower, clothed in a black skirt, black tights with boots, and a red cashmere cardigan. Her black hair, with a carefully calculated grey streak, was neatly blow-dried in a bowl. She was wearing bright red lipstick. Rose arrived at her mother's place late on that Sunday afternoon. She's taken to her mother's room by a nurse who continuously mumbles the dreaded line, "Your mama het iets verskriklik gedoen, your mama het iets verskriklik gedoen. Your mother did something terrible." The room was half dark already. Switching on the light felt inappropriate. As always, her mother's room was tidy and tasteful, even though there was a bloody body in the shower. The only things out of place were little pieces of white paper that Rose knew very well, with scribbled notes everywhere. On the couch, on the bed, on the carpet, on the coffee table, but most of them sellotaped to the many mirrors. Notes that said things like, "You don't understand me because you never had my beauty. You have made my life miserable. Only your brother loves me. I am sure you want me dead. You invented COVID. No more visits. I hope you're happy now." And rubbish my notes. It does not matter. "Will your mommy seen? Do you want to see your mommy?" the nurse asked. "No, please no," Rose said. She had already seen the letter on the dressing table. The last letter she and her brother wrote to her mother, which I explained in the essay is quite a narcissistic woman, a letter which, with an ultimatum in which they asked her to stop her manipulative behaviors and suicidal gestures that she's been involved with, that she's been busy with for years. She also saw that her mother had written all over the letter with red and black pen, as if she was closely correcting a student's bad essay. Words were circled and crossed out, comments with exclamation marks on almost every line, longer comments on the top of the page and the bottom of the page, here and there a loud "no" written in red. "Does it not look like a bloodbath?" Rose says when she shows me the letter later. The body was removed when Rose was sitting with the manager of the retirement village, starting to sort out the paperwork, the familiar clean-up after her mother's chaos. Rose never saw her mother again. Later, when she had to pack up her mother's room, she noticed the mirrors, as if for the first time. There were 7. One long one that got you when you walk into the room, Oregon pine frame. Another long one in the wardrobe door. A big one in a golden frame behind the bed. 2 vanity mirrors, stainless steel, one with a long neck and one with a short neck, different magnifying capacities, on the dressing table. In the bathroom, the mirror on the bathroom cupboard and another long mirror in the shower. There also was a brand new vanity mirror, still wrapped up in the cupboard. Rose did not count that one. In her will, Bella left specific things to specific people. Nothing to Rose, her only daughter. The rest, the unspecified things, Rose had to sort out. Sorting through her mother's stuff, she realized that she wanted nothing. Not the cashmere sweaters, the wool coats, the pearl necklaces, the golden earrings, the handbags, the scarves, the skirts, the shoes. She wanted nothing of her mother's. She took home the notes and the scarred letter and one of the stainless steel vanity mirrors, the one with the long neck. She did not have one of those at home. En weer net, sy was my ma en sy het my geleer om nie lief te wees, om nie lief te wees vir myself.
Good evening, everyone. I firstly would like to thank Olivia and Professor Gouws for the opportunity that I had to share my story. I promised Olivia, she's my cousin by the way, that I am writing down what I want to say, otherwise I'm going to digress. That's just it runs in the family. So yeah, I just want to say, like I said, thank you very much for the opportunity to write my story in COVID Diaries. Today is a significant day firstly, because I got, or I get to bring the awareness and validate the challenges that women with mental illness face during the month of August, which is dedicated to celebrating women and acknowledging their strength and resilience, but also, since it is now exactly a year ago, on the 11th of August 2020, that I tested positive for COVID-19. So it was during the most difficult time of the lockdown that I was writing the essay. I had such bad fatigue and tremors that I was almost not able to write. So my essay is the shortest because I just couldn't anymore close to the end. But it was through God's grace that I could follow through. And I also want to dedicate my essay to my late father, Apostle Samuel Frederick Engelbrecht, who gave up his fight against COVID on the 4th of January 2021 to be with the Lord. My essay is titled, I Am Not Fine with Being Bipolar and COVID-19 Positive. Anxiety, irritability, sensitivity to sound, social anxiety, energy bursts, followed by total collapse, feelings of hopelessness, self-doubt. Imagine experiencing all of that and more every day. Now add lockdown to the equation. I'm a senior marketing and fundraising manager for a non-profit organization in the social development sector. In my world, we're supporting those who are less fortunate is at the core of our business. Lockdown was synonymous with long working hours to an added pressurized environment as it is already. At first, working from home was like music to my ears. When the president announced the first lockdown, I started dreaming about indulging in sleep, doing all the chores that I never have time for, basically an opportunity to get my life in order. However, I soon fell into a pattern of getting up at 6 a.m., switching on my laptop, and starting my day wearing my PJs. Before I knew it, it was 6 p.m., with me still wearing my PJs. Everybody keeps telling me, take it easy, take care of yourself, and there's always tomorrow. If I were normal, without a mental illness, I could easily hide behind the normal anxieties brought on by the coronavirus pandemic. What people often do not realize is that us, bipolars, as I would like to refer to us, are the most hardworking people you could ever find. Because we want to be treated as being normal, as not people who are less capable. In the midst of our daily turmoil, we have to drive ourselves twice as hard to perform optimally. We work as if running on a powered treadmill. That is a burst of energy. And then the total collapse where we literally cannot do anything for ourselves as our bodies and minds stop us in our tracks to say, I can no longer. We do not want to hear that voice. We do not want to be labeled as having a mental illness. And yet we do. During June, I found myself on the brink of an emotional breakdown. Everything became too much. Lockdown, retrenchments, working from home, single motherhood, managing my household, being a full-time teacher, cooking, managing my department, pressure to perform, long hours, anxiety, tiredness, inability to cope, feelings of being misunderstood, being undervalued, fear, pretending to be okay, endless Zoom meetings, being tested to the limit, neediness. I ended off being booked on sick leave for a week. Since lockdown started, I've had to change hats multiple times in a day. In supporting those who were left vulnerable as a result of the lockdown, I'm responsible to ensure that the organization is in a sustainable financial position to be able to provide relief. To top it all, I was suddenly faced with the task of full-time educator. A roller coaster ride would be an understatement of what I have been experiencing over the past couple of months. Then the final nail in the coffin. I tested positive for COVID-19. I must admit that I initially was in denial. I thought, I wonder if my test didn't get mixed up with somebody else's. But as they say, the body never lies. I was in self-isolation for 10 days, as is the norm. I found, however, that I wasn't getting better as everybody said I would. A week after being back at work, I had a COVID-related setback, and I found myself at home again. Although I was officially sick, I pushed myself to get some work done at home, because I may not disappoint. I, after all, had deadlines to meet. When I got back to work, everybody asked me how I was doing. I felt under pressure once again, not to be labeled, and I told everybody how much better I was feeling. Yet again, the body does not lie. I got so weak at work the following week that my colleagues had to take me home with a throbbing headache, extreme fatigue, soreness of joints, even mild diarrhea. I soon realized that there is a real stigma attached to COVID-19. People do treat you differently. You feel as if people do not believe it when you say that you are still sick after having contracted the virus weeks ago. I then started responding in the following way when people asked me how I was feeling. I'm fine. Feelings inside not expressed. Someone once said that people with mental illness do not fake being sick. They fake being okay. This has become the story of my life, especially at this point in my life. I would like to end off with just quoting the last paragraph. Lockdown did not only bring bad tidings, it also highlighted all the positive things in my life. I'm grateful for God's grace in my life, for a wonderful son who tries to cook when mommy is not well, so I eat my burnt pieces of chicken with a smile. I have a very supportive boss and wonderfully caring family and friends. And the past couple of months while I was writing this have taught me that life is short, that circumstances can change in the blink of the eye. In the end, what matters most is to value the things in life that money cannot buy, such as time, kindness, empathy, and last but not least, health. Thank you.
Wow, I have read these stories many, many times in the editing process, but hearing it in your own voices, it's so moving. So if you were in two minds about buying the book, I think it's been settled, and the added incentive is you get a free mask if you buy a book. The masks that are on the cover of the book, the sweatshirt masks. Let me end off by thanking the publisher, Ibali Publisher, for bringing out the book in a rather short period of time, and for the patients. Lisbeth specifically, had to be quite patient with us at some points, and we with her at other points, or with Ibali. So, and that's how it goes with books. It's a rough ride sometimes, but in the end, we have a wonderful product. And Lisbeth, thank you for sticking with us. I'm sure you're very hungry and thirsty, so. Anton just wants to take a picture of all the authors, so join us.